amount of capital, the initial money, selling illegal alcohol, illegal liquor. He was briefly in partnership with Frank Costello, who was a mobster. And so he started out his career in an illegal business. Then he got into various legitimate businesses, such as the movie business. He was very big in the movie business in Hollywood in the 1920s. But he was always noted for extremely unscrupulous business tactics.
The only thing I can say about this is that, first of all, it's perfectly clear that Joe Kennedy wanted to have his son president. But during my more than 6 years of being close to Kennedy on foreign affairs and defense policy, I was never once aware that Joe Kennedy was having any influence at all. In other words, on policy, no. Now, I think that I think it's perfectly true that Joe Kennedy probably twisted a lot of people's arms to make contributions to Jack Kennedy's campaign. I wouldn't doubt that a bit. But I saw nothing that indicated that Joe Kennedy was having any influence on policy.
We should mention that he was ambassador to Great Britain and angered President Roosevelt and angered Winston Churchill and angered all the Allies because he was sympathetic to Hitler. He told Roosevelt, leave Hitler alone. He's doing a good job. He told Churchill the same thing. And because of this, he was fired. Roosevelt threw him out of England, recalled him, and this was such a disappointment for Joseph Kennedy because he realized his political career was through, was finished.
I mean, if you go back to the history of their father that owned and still owns the merchandise mart, I mean, this man wasn't a purist. He was involved in bootlegging like Capone and the rest of those guys. But how come they never get a bad rap?
But no one had a better marker than Sam did with the Kennedys. I mean, it's one thing to have someone that that everyone kind of has good relationships. I've got this other person who I'm going to own. So as a result, Sam was very, very forceful in wanting to make sure that Kennedy got the nod. Now, Lyndon Johnson obviously was a powerful man in the South, and Kennedys were in a position where they were not as strong in the South. I think through the discussions that ensued through the conversations with Marcello, that they recognized, hey, Johnson would be a good way to unify the country. We know we can deal with Johnson and the men down in Texas and in the South, and we knew that Sam had a powerful relationship with the Kennedys, so it made a good unified ticket.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of your ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
John Kennedy was elected President of the United States. He selects his brother as Attorney General of the United States. They are inaugurated and put into office in January 1961.
When Robert Kennedy first started the Department of Justice's serious attack on organized crime, and even after J. Edgar Hoover decided to admit that there was such a thing as a mafia, when presented with public irrefutable evidence, It wasn't until, I think, Robert Kennedy that the Department of Justice really decided to attack organized crime. And the whole concept of the strike forces was Robert Kennedy's, although they didn't really come into fruition until the late 60s, well after he was gone. But when Robert Kennedy came in, the ties between organized crime and all the unions were just so tight, hand-in-glove type of thing. And he set out, and to him, and I think rightfully so, one of the primary national examples was the Teamsters Union. And that's why he went after Jimmy Hoffa.
I give you Jim Hoffa, President of the How long is organized labor going to sit idly by out of fear of a subpoena?
You see, Bobby, had close roots to Irish working-class people. And through the commission, he discovers that Hoffa, a union leader, is raping the union membership, many of whom are Irish. I'm sure he'd just be totally outraged. And he was going to get that guy, and for the sake of the union members.
Hoffa was sort of viewed in the mid-30s when he became active in union politics as being sort of a working-class hero, a champion of the rank and file. In 1940, 1941, the Teamsters turf in Detroit was threatened by a rival union, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, which had sent some organizers into Detroit for the purposes of organizing workers. So as a consequence, Hoffa went to two mafia guys, Santo Perone and a guy by the name of Frank Coppola, and they then proceeded in what became a conspiracy with Hoffa, a conspiracy of evil, if you like. And they drove the CIO raiders out, but as a consequence, Hoffa went from a potentially great union leader to really nothing more than a labor racketeer because of the deal that he made with the mafia in the wake of their participation in the war against the CIO.
The mob needed Jimmy Hoffa as he had enormous power. He was very, very effective as a leader of the Teamsters, and they did follow him, and in order to achieve what else he wanted to, he worked both sides of the street. Jimmy Hoffa, he would make demands for the men and improve their conditions and their pensions and all the rest. He would work that side, and he did a fairly good job of that. That's how he kept them with him, and so that after a while, I think Jimmy Hoffa and the mob, the line between them was you could not distinguish the Jimmy Hoffa was part of the mob, and the mob was part of Jimmy Hoffa.
I knew Joe Holtzman.
He was a close friend of yours?
I knew Joe Holtzman.
He was a close friend of yours?
Just a moment. I knew Joe Holtzman. He wasn't any particular friend of mine. I don't intend to have the impression left, as been stated publicly, that I'm controlled by gangsters. I am not controlled by them.
Mr. Hoffa, I'd be very sympathetic if it wasn't for the fact that a majority of these people are in the Central States Conference. And people under your jurisdiction, you've got people in Detroit, at least 15 who have fleets. You've got Joey Glimko in Chicago. I say you're not tough enough to get rid of these people then.
Well, I don't propose to...
You haven't moved against any of them.
I don't propose to act tough, and I will follow the Constitution of the International Union.
Well, I'll give you my interpretation of why Robert F. Kennedy so strongly emphasized an assault or war on organized crime. And as I was an assistant to him for 4 years, worked with him on a daily basis, and have great respect for him. First, he wanted to do important things. He was a doer. And he wanted to do things that were important and that would seem important.
You were dealing with organized crime and big-time gangsters and hoodlums as we had to deal with them in the days of Al Capone.
So what could he do? Then he wanted to single something out. Now, he'd come from the Senate Investigating Committee. And in the Senate Investigating Committee, He had dealt with forms of corruption. Teamsters Union back in Washington, Hoffa.
Say, that SOB, I'll break his back.
Not concerning him, as far as I know of.
Well, who did you make it about?
I don't know. I may have been discussing somebody in a figure of speech.
Well, who did you make the statement? Whose back were you going to break?
I don't even remember it.
Well, whose back were you going to break, Mr. Hoffa?
They give his speech. I don't even know who I was talking about, and I don't know what you're talking about.
Hoffa remained in power until 1971, I guess. He had been sentenced to prison and entered Lewisburg Penitentiary on March 7th, 1967, in the wake of two convictions, one for jury tampering in Chattanooga in 1964, and that same year for pension fraud. He'd been sentenced to 13 years in prison. He went to jail again in March of 1967. He received a commutation of his prison sentence from Richard Nixon in December of 1971.
He's a sort of a fascinating individual, I think, Nixon. He was astute in many different ways in terms of politics, but he had a dark inner core to him, I feel, that would almost draw him to people like Jimmy Hoffa and to mob connections. I think that started quite early in his career.
But with the commutation, Hoffa was taken out of all union jobs, all union politics. He eventually tried to, from what some say, tried to come back into the union again in defiance of the commutation restrictions. I do not believe that that's the reason why he was murdered.
If this case is successfully won, and I can win in 299 in November and December, then I believe I will be the president at a 1976 convention, yeah.
Jimmy Hoffa goes to the Matches Red Fox restaurant in Broomfield Hills, just outside of Detroit. He's expecting to meet two mob guys, Anthony Provenzano, former capo in the Genovese crime family, former Teamsters vice president, international, and the head of Teamsters Local 560 in Union City, New Jersey. He's expecting to meet Tony Provenzano and a Detroit mafia guy by the name of Tony Giacalone. Hoffa shows up at the restaurant. Neither one of these two guys show up.
The family and friends of James R. Hoffa today are offering a reward of $200,000 for information revealing the present whereabouts and or a safe return of their father and husband.
The government believes that the person who ordered the murder was Russell Bufalino, the head of the Northeastern Pennsylvania crime family, who was also serving as the trustee of the Genovese crime family in the wake of a vacancy in the boss position within the family itself. The belief is that Bufalino was serving as an agent for both Carlos Marcello down in New Orleans and Santos Trafficani down in Tampa. That Hoffa's body, after he was killed, was stuffed into a 55-gallon drum, that the 55-gallon drum was loaded onto a gateway transportation truck and shipped to an unknown destination. Again, my sources have indicated that Hoffa's body was taken into a car smasher, that it was crushed and smelted, that Hoffa is now either a hubcap or a fender, which may be an appropriate end for the former president of the Teamsters Union.
Every peer had a hiring boss, and the hiring bosses were appointed